Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week we're taking a look at a green-white Delirium deck. So you might be asking yourself, why green-white over green-black? Well, most of you will probably know me and know that I don't play decks that are overplayed or tier 1 stuff like that. So I decided, since, there are white Delirium cards, and I actually went on YouTube and searched for green-white Delirium and found absolutely nothing. Nothing that even splashes the white Delirium cards. So I was kind of interested to find out why. Even when I just searched as a general green-white Delirium, even on the proper Magic community, nothing there either. But yeah, so like the keen little explorer I am, I decided I'll build green-white and see how it works. And it actually works pretty well. So, what does green-white Delirium do, and what is it? It's essentially 3-2 Eldrazi Horror Tribal, and I'll show you why. The main build-around card is the Extricator of Sin. So, it is a 2 and a white, a 0-3, and when it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a permanent. If you do, put a 3-2 colorless Eldrazi Horror creature token onto the battlefield. And if it has Delirium, then on your upkeep, then you may transform it into Extricator of Flesh. So this is now a 3-5 and gives all of your Eldrazi, including itself, Vigilance, which is pretty cool. And it also has the ability to tap for 2 and sacrifice any non-Eldrazi creature that you may have, and put a 3-2 colorless Eldrazi Horror onto the battlefield. So you might notice a theme. That's pretty much what we're going through for this entire deck. We're kind of trying to flood the board with bigger creatures, essentially. So we have our auto-includes. I would call this an auto-include anyway, because I haven't seen a green-black Delirium deck that isn't running it. Gnarlwood Dryad. So for 1 green, you get a 1-1 with Death Touch. However, if it has Delirium, then it is a 3-3 with Death Touch. So it's essentially a 3-3 for 1. If you can get it going, which you pretty much can. It also has Death Touch as well, so it slows down your opponent in the early game, slows them down in the late game. If they've got a big creature, they're not going to swing into a Gnarlwood Dryad unless it's actually going to kill us, and then it might as well just be over anyway. So that's why it's included in here. Moving on, we've got the Vessel of Nascency. The Vessel is a 1 mana enchantment, and you can pay 1 and a green to sacrifice it, putting an enchantment into your graveyard, so that's 1 point for Delirium. For those who don't know, you need 4 different card types in your graveyard to activate Delirium. So that's what we're trying to aim for. We're trying to mill ourselves a little bit to get those 4 cards. So we reveal the top 4 cards of our library, and we may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker from among them into our hand, put the rest into our graveyard. So it's a little bit of card advantage in that sense. We get to go 4 cards deep into our deck, pick whichever one we want. And we don't lose planeswalkers for doing this, which a lot of digging cards tend to actually do. So the Vessel is really good for this sort of thing. And it automatically puts an enchantment in your graveyard as well, which is quite hard to do without things like Deadweight and things like that, which is usually the Black's go-to Delirium enchantment. They do run Vessel, of course, but yeah, so this is really good for that kind of thing, and it'll fill our graveyard up, hopefully. As soon as turn 2, we can have Delirium activated, if we're lucky with whatever we drop off the top of it anyway. Moving on, we've got Obsessive Skinner. So for 1 and a green, we have a 1-1 that enters the battlefield. You may put a 1-1 counter on target creature. So it can be a 2-2 for 2, or you can put that counter anywhere else on any other creature. And when you've got Delirium at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if there are 4 more card types, then you get to put a 1-1 counter on target creature. So when it comes down onto the battlefield, you put a counter on a creature, making them nice and big. And on their opponent's step, then you put another one on. So every single turn this guy stays around, he's going to make our creatures a lot bigger and a lot more harder to deal with. So they won't be swinging into us because we'll have quite big creatures that will block most stuff. We'll also have things like the Gnarlwood Dryad that will absolutely block anything of any size. So makes it quite difficult for our opponent to attack into us once we've got our board state sorted. And of course we have certain things like Desperate Sentry as well that benefits from our cards dying. So to see a board wipe or something like that isn't the end of the world either. Plus we have a lot of graveyard recursion as well. So moving on, we've got a 1 of Evolutionary Leap. This is just something I'm testing out at the moment. So for 1 and a green, it's an enchantment. With 1 green, sacrifice a creature, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So what this will allow us to do is essentially just filter out our deck, take out all the creatures that we need. It'll also allow us to kill some of our creatures where it might benefit, things like Pilgrim's Eye. We want that in our graveyard because it counts 2 for Delirium, artifact and creature. We also might want to sack a Desperate Sentry, that'll give us a 3/2 Eldrazi Horror. So that's why I'm testing it out. I haven't gone with both of them yet. Mostly because having 2 in your hand is a bit bad, and I haven't tested out this one yet, so we're going to see how it works. But I'd imagine it would work quite well since we have cards to get back the creatures that we sacrifice as well. And some creatures have the enter the battlefield effects as their Delirium. So we might want to put them in our graveyard to recur them back to cast them again. So we'll see. Right, moving on, we've got Grapple with the Past. This is the first bit of our graveyard recursion. So for 1 and a green, it's an instant speed. Put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may return a creature or land from among them and put it into your hand. So, not from among them, sorry, any creature or land from your graveyard. So we can pick any creature that we've just lost. For example, maybe one of our game winners like Ishkana. If he's in our graveyard, or she, probably she, then we can grab her back for 2 mana and then play her again. And we can keep doing that. We have certain enter battlefield effects as well, so we'll be able to benefit from that kind of thing. And if we're mana screwed on turn 2, then we can grab a land as well. We could probably hit one in the top 3 if we're not really, really unlucky. So, moving on, we've got Declaration in Stone. 1 and a white, sorcery speed, exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. And then they get to investigate for each non-token creature exiled this way. So it's removal for essentially every creature without hexproof. It's a board wipe of tokens in that sense as well. It's just really solid. And it's a sorcery to add to our Delirium as well. Because sorcery, I believe, is the lowest we've got since Eldritch Evolution actually gets exiled, which is a downside. But we'll get to that in a minute. So that's why it's been picked over something like, say, Reprisal or Celestial Purge or anything like that. We want a sorcery in our graveyard, and obviously Declaration is a solid card, so we want to take advantage of that. Then we've got 3 Pilgrim's Eyes. So for 3 mana, we get a 1/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So Pilgrim's Eye allows us to fix our mana. It also is a great target for things like Eldritch Evolution. I went right past it. Eldritch Evolution. We can also sack it to the Extractor of Sin on the other side as well. And pretty much wherever we sacrifice it, we're getting some sort of benefit from it. And it allows us to filter out a land. We are running a single black source for Ishkana's secondary ability as well. So to be able to search that out whenever we like with Pilgrim's Eye is pretty great. We have spoken about Extractor of Sin. He is our game winner. I shall show you him anyway. There you go. And then we move on. We've got Desperate Sentry. So for 2 and a white, we've got a 1/2, not too great. But when Desperate Sentry dies, we get to put a 3/2 colourless Eldrazi token onto the battlefield. So we're really only playing this guy to get him killed. And of course, if you have Delirium online as well, he is actually a 4/2, which is pretty good on its own. Can block a lot of creatures, and it doesn't matter that his toughness is really low, because we kind of want him to die anyway. So it'll be a 4/2 that dies and becomes a 3/2. Probably with Vigilance if the Extricator is out. So we can get a lot of benefit from this guy. The downside of all of his stuff isn't actually that much of a downside, because we can somewhat exploit and use it to our advantage. So that's why he's here. Next we have Inexorable Blob. Yep, I'll speak like a blob does. So for 2 and a green, we get a 3/3. And when you've got Delirium activated, if it attacks, then you get to put a 3/3 green ooze token onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. So this guy can get really out of hand fast. As long as you got Delirium on turn 3, you can be attacking for 6 the next turn, for example. And then 9, then 12, and so on and so forth. And with the 3/3, usually they might have something to block with it. But if we have things like Obsessive Skinner as well, we can make it 4/4 and just get around our opponents there. It kind of forces them to block it as well, to kill it, because otherwise it will just get out of hand. So we can kind of benefit from that as well, kind of force a chump block if we want to do it that way. Then we've got Pulse of Murasa. So for 2 and a green, we have a 2/of instant speed. Return target creature or land from a graveyard to its owner's hand. You gain 6 life. So this is in here, essentially it's a grapple with the past without the mill. And the reason it's in here is essentially to deal with early game aggro, because this deck does take a little bit to set up. We do have a few creatures that will block nicely and we're not bothered about losing them, you know. Things like our Desperate Sentry and our Dryad. But for the times that they're not, then we want to be able to pull a creature card from our graveyard, gain that 6 life, which can swing the game in our favour. Allows us to grab our game winners back, like the Ishkana, and then play them again for the benefit. So it's pretty sweet for that. Next we have Collective Effort. So for 1 and 2 white, Sorcery Speed. It has Escalate, but we'll get to that in a second. So we get to choose 1 or more modes. We've got 3 to choose from. So we can use it as a Reprisal for 3 mana. Not too great. But we can also use it to destroy enchantments. So that can be used for Tutelage, can be used for the Ulvenwald Mysteries, that kind of thing. It can be used for if we've had our creatures locked down, that kind of thing. But what we mostly want to use it for is to put a 1/1 counter on each creature that we control. So once we've made our 3/2 Eldrazi horrors and built them up, we can actually make them 4/3s, and from that point on we can get past a lot more creatures that way. It's also Sorcery Speed. As I said, by the way, the Escalate, the Escalate cost is tap an untapped creature we control, which isn't quite difficult when we've got Extricator of Flesh giving our creatures vigilance, so we can attack in first before we even escalate to get a little bit more value out of it if we choose to do it that way. It's another sorcery for the graveyard as well, which helps out a lot. Moving on, we've got Eldritch Evolution. So usually I tend to cut this card because it's it kind of revolves around picking very specific cards for your deck to make sure that they line up perfectly into bigger creatures, because that is the best way to get benefit out of it, really. So there's an additional cost to cast it. We have to sacrifice a creature. So fortunately for us, we have things that we want to sacrifice anyway. So that additional cost isn't really an additional cost for us for the most part. And for 3 mana, we get to search our library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. And then you get to put that card onto the battlefield. So you may notice we have a lot of 3-drops. And 3 drops plus 2 goes to 5 drops. And you may notice that all of our game winners are 5 drops. So we can really make good use of this Eldritch Evolution. We can, of course, sacrifice a creature to get one of a lower value if we choose to do so. So maybe a blob is locked down and we have no use for it. Sack it, come back and get a Pilgrim's Eye, get a Gnarlwood Dryad to block a big creature. So we can literally tutor up any card in our deck, so long as we do it on a 3-drop. So there is that. We have plenty of 3-drops to choose from, so it's very likely that we'll be able to do that. So it's a 2 mana, pick any card in your deck, any creature card in your deck, and play it in a nutshell. Then we have Nyssa, Voice of Zendikar. So for 1 and 2 green, we have a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. She has the ability to put plant tokens onto the battlefield. It's alright. The things we can do with it essentially is we can collective effort and we can put counters on those plant tokens to make them 1/2s. Very threatening, I know. They're very terrifying, these 0/1 plant tokens. We can also sacrifice them to the Extricator of Flesh, and turn those 0/1s into 3/2s every turn. So we can get a little bit of advantage out of that in that way as well. And the -2 ability, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. So essentially, collective efforts ability that we want to use it for in green. Very good. Allows us to make our board very hard to get by. And then our ultimate as well. We get to -7 and gain X life, draw X cards, where X is the number of lands you control. So if we've been hitting our land drops on curve, then we're going to draw 7, gain 7, which is pretty sweet. If not, then, you know, we'll get a fair amount of value out of this. There's very few times when you ultimate Nyssa without value, and we do have a lot of ways to tutor up lands as well, like the Pilgrim's Eyes and stuff like that, which should mean that we'll be on 7 lands when we come to ultimate her, if we do that anyway. I think most of the reason you want to use Nyssa is to make the plant tokens for the 3/2 horrors, or to -2 to make all of your current creatures a lot bigger. So it's pretty sweet for that. Next we've got Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. So for 2 and 2 white, it's a 4 loyalty planeswalker. The main reason we want to use this is to get out our 2/2 tokens to go wide on the board. This is what this deck does essentially. It goes very wide, and we can sacrifice these if we choose to do so. Not for very much value, but we can turn these into 3/2 eldrazi horrors that will have vigilance as well, just the same way as the plant tokens. We have a +1 ability to make him make him a 5/5 with indestructible, and all damage that would be dealt to him is prevented. So we can get him for 5 without any risk whatsoever to our board state or to losing Gideon. It's very hard to lose Gideon in his +1 state. It does happen, of course, but things like Anguished Unmaking, but if you're going to Anguished Unmaking, you'd have done it before he plussed anyway, I would imagine. Anyway, a -4 ability, the ultimate, we get an emblem with creatures we control, get +1/+1. Yet again, another way to anthem up our horrors as well, make our creatures big. I did have a game in playtesting where I'd ultimated Gideon. I'd done the -2 several times and collective effort, and our eldrazi horrors were like 7s, and I swung in and hit him for like -30, which is pretty sweet. We then have Archangel Everson, so for 3 and 2 white, a legendary creature angel, 4/4 with flash, flying, and vigilance. So flash is essentially we can cast it on our opponent's turn. So in response to a board wipe, for example, like Planar Outburst, we can make her and all the creatures indestructible to protect our board from wipes and stuff like that. We can also use it to swing in with our team without risk of losing anyone. So for example, Eldritch Evolution, a Desperate Sentry, we get a 3/2 off of it. We go into Archangel Everson, that gives all of our current creatures indestructible. We swing in with the team, pretty sweet. And when she dies, we hope she doesn't, because she kills kind of kills a lot of our board. But if she does, we still get a sweet 6/5 flying. And when it transforms into Everson the Purifier, it deals 3 damage to each other creature and each opponent. So this will actually probably close out the game in itself with a 6/5. Very aggressive. No longer has vigilance. It's very important that that's the case as well. So we can't let our guard down after this, because 4/4 self does have vigilance, which allows us to attack and block without much worry about anything at all, as long as they don't have reach or flyers, for example. Then we have Reaper of Flight Moonsilver, a 3 and 2 white 3/3 flying angel. Her main ability, the main reason you play her, is essentially to close out the game. So her Delirium ability allows us to sacrifice another creature, and she gets +2/+1 until the end of the turn. We can only do this if we have Delirium activated. So we've clogged up the board essentially with our ground stuff. They've got a very, very clogged up board on their side as well, loads of ground stuff. We Eldritch Evolution into a Reaper. The next turn, we sack our entire board off to give our Reaper as much power as we can and swing over the top, hopefully for lethal at that point. We've got to make sure that we only do this if it's going to be lethal, because otherwise it can be quite the blowout if our opponent has some sort of removal for the Reaper in response to this all these sacrifice triggers. We can, of course, continue to sacrifice our good sacrificial creatures, some of our tokens that we might generate from the blob and stuff like that, and our plant tokens. We can build up quite the board and quite the disposable army as well for the Reaper to finish off the game. So this is pretty sweet. Next we have Ishkana, Graph Widow, 4 and a green, legendary spider, 3/5 with reach. It has Delirium, so when it enters the battlefield, if there are 4 or more card types, then you get 3 1/2 green spider tokens with reach onto the battlefield. So this can slow our opponent down, it clogs up the board. The green spiders can be used as sack fodder to make 3/2s. Can be used as sack fodder for the Reaper, for example. We can also pay 6 and a black to make our opponent lose 1 life for each spider we control. So essentially, as it comes down in its bare bones form, it's 7 mana to deal 4 damage to our opponent, which might be enough to close out the game later on. What we can do is keep sacrificing Ishkana, bringing her back with things like Pulse of Murasa, casting her again to get more spiders, and keeping that cycle going. And therefore, the 7 mana becomes much more worth it to do. Less as a way of winning the game, but more as just a way of draining your opponent down turn by turn. So it's pretty sweet for that kind of thing. Moving on, we've got a land count. So that's essentially the deck, by the way, anyway, guys. The lands are fairly straightforward. It's 6 plains, 1 swamp, so that we can use Ishkana's ability. We have plenty of ways to search it up, as I mentioned before, with the Pilgrims Iron, stuff like that. And also Evolving Wilds. But yes, we have 1 swamp for Ishkana, we have 6 forests, we have essentially an even skew of green and white throughout, because although we have a lot of greens in the early game, we end up having a lot of whites and then another double white, so it's it might as well be even. It's not too skewed in either direction to merit skewing the actual mana into one direction itself. If you want to try it out, you can, if you want to change it, maybe go 5/7 for example, but I haven't found it necessary. I haven't really been mana screwed too much. Mostly if I'm mana screwed, it's because I've got Evolving Wilds and I needed an untapped land, or I had Westvale Abbey and I needed a coloured land, that kind of thing. But for the most part, the basics and the actual mana colour curve is pretty on top, I would say. Moving on, we've got Canopy Vista. So it enters the battlefield, comes in tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Very easy. We're going to be sacrificing a lot of Evolving Wilds searching for these. A lot of Pilgrims are going to grab these. So we've got Canopy Vistas likely coming in untapped on queue. Unless, of course, we could even have, like, turn 3, have this untapped, that stage as well. Or maybe even a turn 1 play. Nice dual land. We've got Westvale Abbey. So this is a colourless land, adds colourless mana. We can pay 5 to pay 1 life and put a 1/1 white and black human cleric token onto the battlefield. So again, we could make it into a 3/2 eldrazi if we want to. I would never suggest that with that kind of cost, but what it does allow us to do is clog up the board. We can maybe collective effort the 1/1s eventually. Where are they? Collective effort the 1/1s and get them into 2/2s, that kind of thing. Main reason we're running it though is it's really easy in this deck to get to 5 creatures. I have been playing it most of today, and I flipped Ormondal twice in about 6 games that I've been playing with it just today alone. So for 5 and tap, you get to sacrifice 5 creatures. Yet again, we have a lot of creatures you want to sacrifice, so we can get some bonuses out of that. We get to transform it and untap it into Ormondal the Profane Prince, the game winner number 4. So this is a 9/7 flying lifelink indestructible haste. Against aggro, if you get this out, you've won. For the most part, there isn't many board states. Unless you were going to lose anyway, Ormondal can pretty much get you out of whatever state you're currently in. So it's a 9-point life swing if they don't have a flyer, and it often will close out the game in about 2 turns from the point of which you sacrifice the creatures. So it's pretty sweet. Really good card. Then we've got Petal Grove. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest or a plains. We've got lots of forests and plains, and Canopy Vistas also count as forests and plains. So these are almost certainly coming in untapped, so it's pretty sweet. Finally, we have the Evolving Wilds. So mostly you want to play Evolving Wilds in 3 colour decks to fix your mana. In this case, we want Evolving Wilds to sacrifice so that we can get a land into our graveyard to add to Delirium, which is pretty awesome. So it also allows us to fetch our black land, fetch any colour that we might be missing, because we do have a lot of doubles here and there, which could mean that Evolving Wilds comes in very handy in the early game as well, to make sure you have both of double green and double white. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for the deck for today. If you enjoyed the look of the deck, be sure to check out the videos that should be following shortly after this. If you've enjoyed the content, then be sure to like, share, and subscribe and all that jazz. If you're not quite sure about doing any of that, then stay for the end card, see the rest of the content I got to offer, including the link to the games that we'll be following. And as always, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.